it's very interesting. Here we are in our culture, and it's become extremely a militaristic culture. And, you know, once again, the military is at the forefront of our popularity charts, which is, you know, understandable given the nature of what's going on. But it seems that the violence that spawns off of these things continues, and we're hearing in Israel today, and they're blowing people up all over the place. And it's hard for many people to understand. You know, we get caught up in the excitement of it and the intense fervor of patriotism, and the songs and the flags and the prayers all become part of it. But the killing, you know, goes on. Even in Afghanistan, which of course we're going to win the war. There's no way you could not win dropping that many bombs on people. You have to win, but you lose, I mean, basically, because, you know, once the ball is in their court, then you have to wait for their next attack. And I mean, but I wanted to go on back for a minute and just look again at the implications of the crash of that American Airlines plane in New York on November 12th. We didn't really have too much of an opportunity to discuss that before I left. You know, all we know so far is that the tail of the plane fell off. I mean, and that should not be acceptable. And then if you notice, everything has been very quiet since then. You know, we put it kind of in a closet. Why would the tail of an airplane fall off? We say, well, could it have been terrorists? Well, you know, if American Airlines allowed a plane to go into the sky with 300 people on it, a plane that was going to fall apart, that to me would be commercial terrorism of some kind. I mean, I think, but no one really has followed up on that, and so we don't really know. All we know is it was very curious. And there's a word that enters the picture, and I wanted to consider it with you, and the word is I hope I have it spelled right, and I think I do. Synchronicity. Synchronicity. And it's an interesting word because it tends to take explanations away from people and place the explanation for strange developments or coincidence directly to something else. Of course, the first thing that we would all think of is if there is something from a supreme or a higher form or something, we use the word God, you know, because it's part of the word good, so we made up the word God, but you know, whatever. Synchronicity becomes a very, very interesting thing, and it simply says when you have a number of coincidences that begin to build up, the outcome tends to have the mark of a greater authority. Things change, and yet things change flowing basically backwards into the same patterns of things that were before. It becomes very important because it points to a flow of existence that is predictable and one that happens for a purpose. In other words, we don't say, well, that's a coincidence, because when synchronicity becomes part of this, it's a coincidence with a purpose. Synchronicity actually moves itself directly into that old law that we are all familiar with of cause and effect. What is the cause? Or this was the cause. This is the effect. I've, been looking at some of the email while I was away, and, it's pretty much basically the same. Some people are blaming the Muslims, some people are blaming the Jews, some people are blaming the Christians and blaming the Americans, and everybody's blaming somebody. But nonetheless, somewhere along the line, something happened that stimulated an outrage of a kind. So here you had some kind of a cause, which then caused a violent reaction, and that was the effect. Well, then the chain goes in motion. This violence then caused a violent reaction, and it's much like nuclear fission. This reaction then caused another reaction, and it goes on, and the chain goes on and on and on, and people start bombing each other and blowing each other up. And you have periods, like the center of a hurricane, you have periods of peace for elongated times where nothing happens at all. But the reaction that came as a result of this violence is just quiet until, you know, I mean, it was quite a long period of time in our culture when there was nothing basically going on. Monica Lewinsky was the big problem, and that was it. And then suddenly the Twin Towers collapsed in this attack. But that attack was a reaction to something that had happened back further down the chain. And that's basically, you know, how these things occur. Now, when you come and then say synchronicity has a part in this, that changes everything, because if synchronicity has a part in it, then it's really not the violence inherent in the minds of people, but some kind of strange natural phenomena that makes this happen. It's like when Hollywood takes an old movie. I know there was an old movie with, I remember, some of you may not remember some of these movie actors that I do, but there was an old movie that I liked a lot. It was called The Postman Always Rings Twice. And it starred a guy named John Garfield, who was a really great actor of those days. He would be a heartthrob if he lived today. And they remade that movie, The Postman Always Rings Twice. And I'm not sure if Jack Nicholson played, did Jack Nicholson play John Garfield's part? Okay, same story, same plot, different actors. That's basically what synchronicity is. Synchronicity is a story that occurred, or a situation that occurred thousands of years ago, reoccurs now, different actors, different tools. I mean, instead of using swords, you use missiles, okay? So the same plot is played out by different people. And basically, that's synchronistically. And amazingly, it's part of life. One of the interesting things, I was listening to the radio this morning, and they were saying that the American people support the government's decision to take away some of the civil rights that you have. I mean, they say that the American people feel that it is okay now, because it's a difficult time, for the police to be able to go into your house unannounced and walk around and look through your house while you're not home, because, you know, of this time. Well, but they do, and that's the law now. You have to understand. That's the law. The police have the right to come into your house, look around, and when you're not home, and then tell you they were there after you come back, okay? And majority of people, I think it was something like 76% of the people thought, well, you know, it's okay, you know, for now. But if you go back into the 1930s, that's exactly how it happened in Nazi Germany. Everybody gets caught up in the songs and the flags and the patriotism, and at all costs, they say, government, protect us from this evil. Well, now, back away from it. No one is in any way insinuating that there's any Nazis in our government in Washington. I'm not saying that. I'm not insinuating that there's any evil people there. I'm not considering the president or anybody's evil. It's just the way it happens. It is just the way. Circumstances replay themselves. The plot plays out again in a different way, a different environment. So, you know, well, you might have an Adolf Hitler, obviously an evil character, saying, we have to do this for your good. And everybody says, Sieg Heil, you're right. Now you have a George Bush, good man, not an evil man, good man, saying, we have to do this for our common good. And everybody says, you're right. But the effect is exactly the same, see? Because you don't have people taking your freedom away. That's not the way it works. You give it away. And when they play the songs and they wave the flags and everybody goes to church and they all come out and say, we have to do this, we united, we stand as one, And then you find out that the police do have a right to do these things. They're setting up military tribunals to try people who were involved with this stuff, which means that the trials can be conducted in secret. The trials can be conducted in secret, and there's no jury. The jury and the judge are made up of soldiers. Okay, now, a lot of people say, well, you really have to do that now because of this Osama. The problem with it is it establishes itself once again. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. It's something that's happened before. And the idea is simply to look again at this play, this drama that you're an actor in, and see how, once again, the drama replays itself. So we have we have an evil situation with Nazis and Hitler saying we have to take your liberties away for your common good. We have good people now, and they're saying we have to take your liberties away for your common good. We'll protect you. The outcome is the same. And once even the situation calms down, you still have the government now which can look at your mail or your email or come into your house and do all of these types of things which they never could do before. And it just happens. Not evil people doing it. It just happens. It's synchronicity. It's happened before. It happens again. We're actors in a new version of an old story that's been acted out before by other actors, or were those other actors us too? So what is synchronicity from a standpoint of definition? So let's take a look at overhead 507. And synchronicity, okay, the state or fact of being synchronous, good. Coincidence of events, now here's the part. Coincidence of events that seem to be meaningfully related. Attack, anti-Jewish attack, York, England, Tower, 1190. Attack, anti-Jewish attack, New York, Twin Towers, 9/11. Synchronous. But here's the point about synchronicity. Synchronous, not just, wow, that's a coincidence, seeming to be meaningfully related. In other words, there's a connection here. Say, a connection that the hijackers could not have known about, or maybe they did, but still, in other words, it's out of their hands, out of your hands. But here's an interesting point. This is something we're going to look at shortly. Conceived in the theory of Carl Jung as an explanatory principle explaining on the same order as causality. Carl Jung was a noted psychoanalyst who did a lot of work in synchronicity, saying, how could these things, we're going to look at some of that. But this word causality, we want to raise the thing here. We'll take a look at that word, causality. Causality, the principle of relationship between cause and effect. Okay, what was the cause of the airplane crashing into the World Trade Center? You notice I didn't say what was the cause of the World Trade Center falling down. We know what that was. Airplanes hit it. What was the cause of the airplanes hitting the World Trade Center? Why did they fly into the World Trade Center? What was that all about? And so you go back then and we get into this thing of synchronicity. Just drop that again. Synchronicity saying a meaningful coincidence. Coincidence that seems to be meaningfully related. The two important words are meaningfully and related. It didn't just happen. It happened for a purpose, which then takes it way out of the privy of George Bush or Osama and puts it into the privy of what we refer to as God. A structure of intelligence that we can't see, we can't feel, and yet is evidently orchestrating something that we are acting out or experiencing. For what purpose? But having a meaning. say.
Isn't this, without God though, you don't need, we have enough cause and effect.
No, wait, nobody can hear you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We have cause and effect, and we don't need a God.
Okay, I'm not quite following you, Albert, but explain. Can you explain that?
What happened is that an airplane came,
Right.
the effect was blam, and we know who did it,
Right.
why.
Right.
So
No, I understand that. Okay, let's go. Let's dig on that a little bit. We have the Twin Towers. We have the airplane. Bang, bang. The thing comes down, and we know, and there's no problem. We know basically that this was, as far as we understand, a Muslim, anti-Jewish type of sentiment and so forth and so on, and an attack against a World Trade Center, and in the United States as an accomplice to the Jews and so forth and so on. So we don't really need this as part of the explanation. However, this is the problem. We have this anti-Jewish New York Twin Towers, September 11th. Now, we had in not 9/11 but 11/90 a tower in York, anti-Jewish. It appears synchronous. If the people that flew the plane were aware of this, maybe. If they weren't, then this. Unless it's simply a coincidence without any meaning. If it's a coincidence without any meaning, then it's not synchronicity. If the coincidence has a meaning, then it's synchronous, then this guy gets involved. Or this entity, or this energy, or whatever it may be. It's like Moses, who didn't exist. Don't tell, don't say. Moses, you're going to the mountaintop. God says, look at the promised land. You can't go in. And the next day he's dead. Martin Luther King, Ebenezer Baptist Church, I've been to the mountaintop. And I can't go in. I can't go in with you. Next day he's dead. Now, I hear all these people say, well, the reason Moses couldn't go into the mountaintop is because God said strike the... And I believed this at one time. God strike the stone. And water will come out. And the next time Moses, he hit it twice. So he screwed up. Or there's a whole bunch of reasons. Well, I saw a preacher on TV, well, Moses wasn't faithful to God. But here's the reason. Here's my explanation to you of the reason why Moses couldn't go into the promised land. Because nobody can go into the promised land. The promised land is something you can lead people towards. You can never get there. Because life is simply the quest. I'm looking for it. And as I'm looking for it, I'm starting to benefit by all of the things of existence. You can never get, because if you get there, then it's over.
Well, that's the same thing as Buddha with the journey and destination.
Yeah, basically, same as Buddha with the journey and destination. It's like the Bhagwan once said, the whole sense of life is the journey, the quest. Because if you get to God's house and you knock on the door and God answers, then what do you do? What else is there? Then you might as well be a puff of smoke and blow away. And so here you had then the situation with Moses and Martin Luther King, a very synchronous type of story. Obviously, Martin Luther King could have, being a preacher, come out and, as a leader of people trying to take people, black people, out of bondage of discrimination into a promised land, would say, you know, I can't go in with you. Well, now what told him that, or what, you know, or did he know exactly what I was speaking of, that the promised land is something you strive for? But he had no way of knowing the next day he's going to get killed. And complete that story. So there's two stories. So that sets up a synchronous type of thing. There was a meaning. Now, this word God, I'm not even comfortable with that. But I mean, it's something above and beyond, or a power above and beyond. Now, for instance, what was the idea of Moses? The idea of bringing to the promise. What was the promised land? You know what the promised land was? The promised land is the land flowing with milk and honey. Do you know what milk and honey is? A sugary, milky substance, which is galactose, which is what powers the brain. The land flowing with milk and honey is the land flowing with galactose, which is your brain. It is a renewed mind. That's what the land flowing with milk and honey is. We went through that how many years ago? Many, many years ago. We can go back and start, you know, I always think, we can go back and start all over again, because everybody forgot what we were talking about anyhow. I got millions of these. That's why Jimmy Durante said, I got a million of them. We got all of this stuff. We could start from scratch, and everybody said, gee, did you hear what he said? It's all new. We've been doing, that's synchronous. We've been doing it all over again. Nothing new under the sun. But if you remember, we did that about the land flowing with milk and honey, because what powers your brain, what feeds your brain, is called galactose, which is a sugary, milky substance. And that's the land flowing with milk and sugar. So, and you know, you raise a very interesting question, because we always have to be cognizant of several things here. One, it could just be a coincidence. I mean, those things do happen. Two, it could have been the people that perpetrated the attack who were aware of these other things happen and decided to do this as a way of acting out the history of Jewish destruction and so forth and so on. That's possible. Coincidence, intent on the part of the attackers, or number three, and we come to this part, synchronicity. If it's synchronicity, then it has a meaningful relationship. The attack on the Twin Towers and the attack on the tower in York have a meaningful relationship. If that's the case. As Martin Luther King saying, I've been to the promised land, Moses been to the promised land. If those two things had a meaningful relationship. What struck me is so many religious people in this country, I think we're the only one. I don't think anybody, I've never heard that comment connecting Martin Luther King and Moses and the Promised Land story, but here. We'll look at Carl Jung's thoughts later, but this is very interesting, and I'm glad you raised that, because do that more, because sometimes we just, in talking about these things, we fly over them. And Albert raised a really excellent question. I mean, we know doggone well a plane flew into the building. We knew the thought patterns of these people, so we really don't need anything here. I mean, it's as plain as can be. Why? It's continuing violence. The synchronous part, though, is if you can attach it to something that happened thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago. In this particular case, about 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Then you get this rascal here we call God. And I say rascal because nobody knows what this is. You turn on the television, sometimes you see these guys, God loves his church, God, what are they talking about? Nobody knows. Really, nobody knows. Everything, and I would be the first one to say it, and I don't think the last one, everything that religious groups have taught, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever, are not true. None of it. And yet, people live and die by it. Do you honestly think if their explanation of God was true, then the world, the planet Earth would have been the nightmare it is? I mean, if it's not a missile gets you, cancer does. I mean, is that the way it's supposed to be? Of course not. Because we have inundated ourselves with superstitious teachings that come from a period in Europe known as the Dark Ages. The Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. And they laid the foundation for the teachings that people give from pulpits today. And that's why there's all of the screaming and fighting and killing and hating and so forth and so on. I can't, if I was to go back and look at any religion and say, well, you know, what have they taught that's right? I couldn't tell you one thing. Could you think of anything that's true? Albert, and I respect Albert very much, and he's shaking his head, saying, what have they ever said that's true? You have to have faith. But the faith is predicated not on a relationship with God or a knowledge of God. It's that what you told me is correct. I have to have faith in you, what you told me. I mean, I'm born, and then I'm sent off to some school, and then I'm sent into the hands of some pastor somewhere. I have to have faith that he isn't lying. But you know what? He was lying. And now we reach a point of bypassing all of that and going directly to God. I mean, I think the children and the animals and nature have suffered enough at the hands of this stuff. And so now we get to a point of saying, maybe we should start looking at what's happened here, what's happened in our lifetime, and in connecting it to these other things and look at the synchronous or the synchronicity attached to it and see if there are meaningful lessons that we're being taught. You want to call it God? That's fine. Coincidences or coincidence of events that seem to be meaningfully related. That's synchronicity. Coincidence of events that seem to be meaningfully related. Would you think it reasonable to say that the story says Moses went to the mountaintop, saw the promised land, and was dead the next day, and the fact that Martin Luther King said he went to the mountaintop, saw the promised land, was dead the next day? Would you think that's synchronous? I would. And if it's synchronous, then those two stories are meaningfully related. Why? Nobody asks. Okay. Anti-Jewish attack, New York, Twin Towers, 9/11. Anti-Jewish attack, York, Tower, 11/9. Would it be reasonable to say their two are synchronous, they're related? Meaningfully, then it would say meaningfully related. Why? In other words, things happen, events. We call it coincidence because it appears that the same thing has happened at a different time in a different place. Obviously, different equipment is used. Somebody's riding a horse and attacking. The other guy's flying a 747 and attacking. It's the evolution. Yet the definition states that the events seem to be meaningfully related. In other words, there is a reason that these things happen. This is the scary part, or not scary part, the interesting part. There is a plan. That something has devised a plan. There is an intelligence, and if there's a plan, there's an intelligence behind the plan. Now you know what we're running into? Who said, this can plan and carry out the plan? If anything can plan and carry out the plan, it is an intelligence, it is consciousness, it is photon. Remember? When we were studying Kramer and Zukov and all, they said, photon has the ability to plan and carry out the plan intelligently, therefore it is conscious. Light, photon. Light. God is light. So you go on to that second word. You want to put that back up? That second word in the definition, causality, you see the relationship. We'll drop it down. The principle on the same order as causality. Okay, causality, the principal relationship between cause and effect. There is a conceived principle here. The cause that happened and resulted in an effect before. Let's go back for a minute. The cause of the attack in York, England on the tower in 1190 resulted in an effect of devastation against the Jewish people, whatever else might have happened, I didn't study. But what it's saying here is that effect and that cause will happen in the same way now. And what brings it into synchronicity is here, tower, Twin Towers, 1190, 9/11, York, New York, anti-Jewish, anti-Jewish. The cause that happened and resulted in an effect before, York, England, will happen basically the same way and result in the same effect at another time, September 11th, 2001. And that's exactly what the Bible says. Carl Jung talks about cause and effect coming from synchronicity, a meaningful purpose. And so the Bible is in agreement with Carl Jung when it says in overhead B 153 from Ecclesiastes 1:9, the thing that has been, York, England, it is that which shall be, New York. And that which is done, 1190, York, England, is that which shall be done, 9/11, New York. And there's no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof we may say, look, this is something new. The towers were attacked and destroyed. No, it's been already of old time in 1190, which was before. And so what interesting text, scripture, whatever you wish to call it, is here, which is in total agreement with Carl Jung and in total agreement with the definition which we see in the dictionary of the word synchronicity. That which has been. We consider the attack on the World Trade Center. We consider this because it is an outstanding event. Nothing of this magnitude has ever happened before where two buildings such as this size were attacked. So in looking at the attack, we follow synchronicity and say what has happened in the past may be similar or at least carry coincidental aspects in it. Because synchronicity and the Bible both say there's no new thing under the sun. You know, this should be very interesting. It's very interesting to me because, you know, we're getting to something that we can say, this is something in the Bible that's absolutely true. We can prove it. Very few things in the Bible you can. So when you go to that second word there, causality, it's interesting. Back once again to the date of destruction in Judaism, you stay there, Tisha B'Av. Remember we did that? Probably to the point where you got sick of it. Tisha B'Av. Okay? Which is a time to commemorate destruction in Judaism. In the lunar calendar, which is the religious calendar of Judaism, it means 9/5. In the solar calendar, which is the calendar the outside world uses and that we use, it means 9/11. For this reason, it becomes curious. We have an anti-Jewish attack on the World Trade Center on 9/11. And in addition, when considering 9 AV, we find the World Trade Center was located on Greenwich Street, which begins in Upper Manhattan as 9th Avenue. So, 9 AV is the synchronicity part. that could not have possibly been planned by the hijackers because the World Trade Center was built so long ago. But this is the scary part. The hijackers didn't know they were going to build the World Trade Center on an extension of 9th Avenue. They weren't even, maybe some of them weren't even born, I don't know. But was it placed there for a meaningful purpose? Was it placed there because it was doomed from the very beginning? Was this the golden calf that was going to be destroyed via the Old Testament? So if the World Trade Center had any significance of being on 9th Avenue, or at least an extension of it, that would have had to have been planned by a higher power, a higher intelligence, not hijackers. See, I don't know if you see what I'm saying. The tower, the date, the anti-Jewish attack, if this is synchronicity, then even though the date and the anti-Jewish part and the tower part could have been planned by Earth people, the fact that the place was on an extension of 9th Avenue would have had to be from a higher source. They couldn't have done that. A strange play being acted out again, connected with the World Trade Center, comes to us as I talked to you about in York, England. The same thing, Clifford's Tower, 1190. I mean, it could have been any other date. It could have been 1291, or it could have been 1191 or 10 or 8, but 11/9. This is 9/11. So this year we had an anti-Jewish attack, Twin Towers, New York, 9/11. Possibly could have been in the minds of the attackers. But it's beginning to look to me like we have a higher intelligence involved here. In other words, this whole thing may be planned out, and it may be coming to a tremendous final page in the book. Because this attack and this attack are only different in the size of the destruction. So then what comes next? And if what comes next isn't really coming from attackers, but is coming from this power, then what is there to say? I mean, then you can just whip out your Bible and go to the last pages of the book of Revelation and read about the great city laying in ruins and the smoke coming from the city and all of the people who traded and dealt in stocks and everything, wailing and gnashing of teeth and all that crazy stuff because it's over. So you can't help if you follow this. See, go with me for a minute. 9/11, Jewish destruction. 1190, Jewish destruction, towers, New York, Willis, York. An old movie that has been recast with new actors, us, for a meaningful purpose. That's scary. Not scary, it's scary. It opens up a whole involvement of something that you or I or President Bush or Osama or nobody else has any control over or can change at all. A meaningful purpose. It happened before, it happened again. What's next? So then if you follow this the way I'm following it, you cannot help but come to the conclusion that this plan is, for lack of a better word, God's. In other words, it would appear this may very well be the will of God. And if that's the case, forget about it. And so then you go on to this thing that happened next, and that was the flight of this airplane the tail fell off. Well, you're not going to find anything like that thousands of years ago because they didn't have any airplanes. How could synchronicity figure here? Because back in the Bible times, there was no airplanes. So then how could it possibly be synchronous? I had somebody write me, there is a little variation on the opinion as to the destruction of the first temple. Some theorize it was 586. Some say 587. I have some people say, well, there's a question here because there's a lot of A lot of historians have feel that the destruction was 586, not 587. But wonder if synchronicity is involved here, and the synchronicity is saying it was 587. Flight 587 of American Airlines crashed a couple of months after the Trade Center affair. The destruction of the temple, the first temple, in Jerusalem was 587 BC. Now, if this hadn't happened, you know, I'm not interested in this. This is the temple. I'm only interested in this because this happened. And I don't care if some people say, well, we think it was 586. Well, the fact that this attack on the tower was synchronous with the York Tower attack, 11/90/9/11, and then 2 months later, you have this, and the tail falls off, and it's flight 587. It would seem to me that synchronicity was saying that the temple did fall in 587 and not 586. Because there's a higher authority preaching here. And the other scary part about this is that the great government, and I'm not being sarcastic, has suddenly stopped telling us why the tail fell off. How many planes have taken off since that? The tails didn't fall off. How many times planes took off before that and the tails didn't fall off? This plane, the tail fell off. And it crashed in New York, right on top of people who had already experienced this. So the first temple destroyed 587. You know what is interesting to keep in the back of your head? When was the second temple destroyed? AD 70. How many would like to get on flight 70? Anywhere. I wouldn't. I wouldn't get on flight 2 anywhere. Yes?
It's interesting that you said 2 because when you add up those numbers, 5, 8, and 7, it comes out 20, which is 2, and the 9, 11 reduces also to 2, and 2 is the number of secrets.
Okay. Very good. And, you know, would you mind coming up here? Come up here, because it's not fair to you, because Albert gets on all the time because he's up front, and nobody heard what you said. Now, come on up and just turn around here so that, okay.
There are so many things that are always related, and when you add up the numbers, it comes to 20, which reduces to 2, and the 11/9 and 9/11 also reduces to 2, and 2 in tarot or whatever is the number of secrets.
Okay.
And so if you keep delving, you're going to come up with the answers, and the number 7 is the number of completion. Mm-hmm. So somehow or another, the numbers always work.
Very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Good. Anybody else would like to add? Okay. Real quick. What time did I start?
About 11:30.
God, we started late.
Yes, you did.
Now, on 11/12/2001, I don't know what that number adds up to, but 11/12/2001, an American Airlines plane crashed in New York. Now, not concerning ourselves with the cause, let us just suffice it to say that the flight number was 587. All right? And what we just heard was interesting, reducing to 2 and so forth, and the number of secrets and then the number of completion, which is the second destruction of the temple. 587, a flight crashed into New York City 2 months after the terrorist attack. So we're getting into synchronicity here, an involvement of a higher power, okay? All right. And we find that this Tisha B'Av 9/11 is the date of destruction in Israel, which was developed to commemorate the destruction of the first temple, which was 587. So there's curious. The second part of the event, which is curious from the standpoint of synchronicity, is that the plane that crashed was scheduled to fly to Santo Domingo. Did you know that? Santo Domingo is located on a river that has a strange name. The name of that river is Ozama. It's a coincidence. Nobody can make that up. This is a fact. It's on the Osama River. Flight 587, the date of the destruction of the first Jewish temple, crashed on its way to Osama. Now, in a short space of 2 months, to me, in New York, there is too much coincidence to be coincidence. I have to say there is an involvement either in the minds of the hijackers. Did they know that 587 was flying to a city on Osama or not? If they didn't, then it's synchronous. It's a meaningful purpose. And you are involved. I mean, you all came here. Many of you have come here for a long time, and you all sat out there and say, when's something going to happen? All this stuff is happening, and you're staring at me. Some of you guys? Because what can you say? You can't change that. You can't change that. You can't change that and that. So you say you want to know when something's going to happen. Are you ready to accept the fact that something's happening? Or as they say, what's up? So there are 2 temple destructions. And the first temple is 587, and the second number you got to watch now is 70, because that was the year the second temple destroyed. There's another coincidence which is worth considering as part of the synchronicity. In New Jersey, of where we are located, on the day of the American Airlines flight 587 went down, that was on November the 12th, 2001. There were 2 lottery drawings that day. Would you put up 508?
Yeah, the same thing.
Pick 3. November 12th, 2001, the number 587. Okay? Now they changed it and they went to a midday pick. Pick 3, midday pick 578. Okay, it's a coincidence. Oh, you believe it? Forget it. 2 lottery drawings that day, the flight 587 crashed. 587, 578. Place on top of that the fact that we're looking for involvement of a higher mind force. The crash of 587 attached to the temple, the World Trade Center attack 9/11, which is attached to the destruction of the temple, connected to a flight that's heading for Santo Domingo, which lies on the banks of the Osama River. I think the big guy's involved here. So what is it saying to you? There's a message coming to all of you. To all of us. That something is up. Something really amazingly exciting and interesting is here. And in not too long a time we'll be focusing, a little bit on the real aspects of this and the connection of meditation. Try to move away from the abilities or lack thereof of earthbound hijackers and look at the non-earthbound invisible entities of photon intelligent light beings, those hovering in this room, sitting right next to you right now, whispering in a non-audible way through light into your head saying, are you paying attention to this? Does this make sense? You starting to get the feeling?
Billy, then you're saying that this brings in the money changer aspect of it. The money-
Not necessarily this. No, I don't. It's a point that you raised, and Jones raised the question, does this bring in the money changer aspect of it? I don't, I wouldn't be able to say that one way or the other. A pick 3 or whatever in the lottery. I think what more than that brings in all right, just a minute here, we got the balcony's getting upset. All right. Oh, all right, get up here. Come on, you can't sit in the back and say that. But no, before you start, just come up around here. I'll make your call. What I do think, however, brings the money changers part of it, and I just think this. I mean, I'm just thinking this. What I do think is possible are the gold bars, the billions of dollars of gold bars they brought out of the basement of the World Trade Center, which definitely could have connection to the golden calf. Yes, ma'am.
Once again, these numbers are talking to you because 5 is the number of money, 8 as is above is below, and then 7 completion. So here you're talking about money, and you're talking about what's going on in the world, what we are doing and how we are doing it, and if we don't straighten up. And this is a very, very big message.
Okay.
Far greater than...
Well, you work on that and delve into it. Very good.
No, you delve into
No, but you see, everybody has a skill here, and she obviously is studying this, and I'm not a student of that. And that's why it's so helpful when you come up, and if like what Albert was given to check me here a little bit, and let's get a deeper explanation, because we can go off and not fulfill the things the way it should be. And so that's very interesting. Albert was a scientist in his working days, and I remember that one of the things that he told me a long time ago is take everything and put the slide under the microscope. And a lot of it isn't going to work. But only by neglecting nothing and putting everything under the microscope will you find. And that's why all of these things are so interesting. And as you said, it's certainly 587. And just where she was talking about money, it could definitely be a connection. Because we don't know the mind of the invisible. Keep in mind now we're talking to and we're going to be guided in a few weeks by Carl Jung and his thoughts on this. And this guy really was a special character. And Carl Jung says this synchronicity stuff has a meaningful purpose to it. It's not just an accident. Okay? So then the importance of our search takes us to an extremely amazing reaches, far more important than the plans of any earthlings. Was that somebody knocking on something? Okay. Well, I don't know. Let me just end this here. When we last met, okay, we discussed the presence of God in the attack on the World Trade Center. The hijackers were praying, remember? And the passengers on the plane were praying. And from what we observed in the outcome, it appeared that God listened to the prayers of the hijackers because their mission was successful, while the passengers who were praying to have their lives saved died. But when we took a closer look, if you remember, at the instructions of the hijackers, we found a prayer that seemed to counter the argument that their prayers were answered. And we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at the nature of God, prayer, and all of this business as we go along, and then reintroduce you to Carl Jung and some of his thoughts, because I think we have enough here to say to us, let's stop looking at President Bush and stop looking at Osama and stop looking at Israel and all of this, and start looking upward at this plan this play that's being acted out by all of us, and which we are about to really experience big time. As William Shakespeare said many years ago in his writings, all the world's a stage, and all the people are merely players. And the drama is the same show. And so the old movie has been recast with a new cast of characters. So we can look at that and probably get a pretty good idea. And then on top of that, the great input we've had this morning on the value of number. And you know, sometimes you see a person come up and say, well, this number means this, and this number means that, and that number means this. And a lot of times you don't take that in any way seriously. You say, oh, yeah. There was a person who kind of felt the very same way, and that was the father, if you would, of mathematics, was Pythagoras. And it might be well to look back at his work as the premier mathematician and a person who dabbled in what is called trans-teleportation. I remember when Pythagoras, in addition to his mathematics and the meaning of numbers, which the Greeks were very famous for, in the harmony of Apollo and so forth, but Pythagoras gave the notes from each of the planets. And they said, well, how do you know what notes come from the planets? He says, because I've been there. And you know, who is to argue with somebody of that stature? But if you look at all of the geometric patterns of the Greeks, they're all based on numbers and meanings of numbers, and indeed the crop circles are of the same thing. So it's a very interesting time. Yes?
With Gaskell, with 2, wasn't that also good and evil, the opposite?
Yeah, well, there's a duality.
Yeah.
There's a duality. Numbers can have various meanings, and of course, you know, you take these things here, and you bring them into the structure of where you live, and you apply them. Tish B'Av in Jewish religion is 9/5. Tish B'Av in the cultures of the world outside of religion is 9/11. And then, you know, you can start looking at numbers and start breaking down and really get into this stuff. But whatever, the point in this particular day that we're discussing together here is that it would appear as if this was part of a cosmic plan, is part of a cosmic plan, and the implications of it are far above and beyond anything that any religious people or politicians of this earth are aware of.
Considering the security of the airlines these days, it's going to be hard to believe that if any other plane would then take a dive. Right?
Yes.
But isn't the entrance to the Holland Tunnel on off of 7th Avenue or on 7th Avenue?
I don't know. Yeah. It could be. I know that the entrance to the Lincoln is on 9th.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, all of those things are interesting. And you know what? The direction you're going does not necessarily mean it has to happen next month or next week. It could be next year. Yeah. I mean, once we're firing the volley now, it's like a tennis game, and we're serving now, and we're serving up big time over in Afghanistan. Well, then after everything stops, then the ball's in their court, and then, you know, who knows? But you know, Don, what you say takes us back just for a moment to that point. If it was up to the president or up to Osama or up to the Taliban or whoever these people, I have no idea who these people, but if it's not up to any of these people,
right, it'll happen.
And you know, it's going to happen. It's like the earth changes idea and the concepts. It's who can stop that? Who can change that? So these things definitely can happen, and I would say that would be a prime thing to consider.
Well, how do you go into New York when you go in? You go in Lincoln or Holland?
I don't go anymore. Lincoln.
Well, I think you should take the Holland Tunnel and see where it goes out the next time. You're downtown anyway, right?
Yeah.
Well, why would you? Yeah, but you come out, you're downtown.
Well, I've always gone through the Lincoln Tunnel. Always got, and there was never a time. There was never a time, Donald, that I didn't go through the Lincoln Tunnel, sitting there thinking, "Wow, what what a place to blow this." You know, and then you'd accelerate a little, and always looking for that light at the end of the tunnel so you get out of there. But, you know, I just want to leave you with this one thing, and today, that's very important to me. My mind has been pulled a little bit away from the plans and the plots of the Earth people to the plans and the plots of the non-Earth people. And that this is not something of Osama or President Bush or Jews and Muslims, but is something of a much higher nature. And if it is, then it fulfills itself in the book of Revelation. There's no...
Is this section on your website about the 587, Osama, San Domingo?
No, I don't think I got that on yet, because I've been away in Florida.
That's no excuse. Computers travel.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's very true. And I did take my computer with me, and the only place that I was able to get a connection for modem was at my brother's house, and I had to connect to the cable company at that time, and it was. He says, "Oh, don't worry about it." I said, "It's an 8, you know, don't worry." Right. He said, "I don't care if it's an 800 number. Don't worry about it. Whatever you need to do." So, but I tied up his phone for about an hour and a half. You know, that message is coming in. It takes my time. So, but that's all. I didn't really get into any.
Albert.
Yes, Albert.
No, I just wanted to tell you,